UFC Vegas 75 is coming up this weekend, so I am here to give you 5 fights that you cannot miss on this weekend's card. The main event, obviously, is where we have to start. Sean Strickland taking on Abusipian Magomedov in the middleweight division. Everyone knows Sean Strickland by now. He's quite a big personality and he's quite outspoken, but he's been a staple of the middleweight division for about 3 years now. He's been in that top 15. He's fought a lot of serious contenders in that division. His last fight was a win over Nasruddin Imavov in January. That fight took place at light heavyweight because it was on short notice. And before that, he lost a split decision to Jared Cannonier. So we're talking serious opposition that Strickland has faced. Whereas you look at Abusipian Magomedov, and he's unknown to a lot of UFC fans. He has only had one fight in the UFC, which was a 20-second knockout against Dustin Stoltzfus at UFC Paris. So while Magomedov might be unknown to UFC fans, he is quite an experienced fighter. Just under 30 fights professionally, I do believe. And he's had success in other promotions. He's fought in the PFL. He's fought on the German regional scene. So I think he's to be respected. And even if you just go off of his UFC run so far, that one knockout against Dustin Stoltzfus, it was a vicious front kick knockout. So I think Magomedov has to be respected here. He's a small underdog coming into this fight, which is to be expected given the fact that Strickland is the more experienced fighter. He's number 7 in the world, whereas Magomedov isn't ranked. Definitely a piece of peculiar matchmaking, to say the least, but I do think Magomedov will prove that he deserves to be in these conversations. Personally, I'm going to go with Strickland just based on his track record at the highest level, but this one could go either way, I will be honest. The co-main event then is top 15 lightweights. Damir Ismagulov is back after a very brief retirement to take on Grant Dawson. As I mentioned there, Ismagulov did temporarily retire after his loss to Arman Tsarukyan in December, stating health issues, but then came back within about a month. And I'm delighted to hear that because Damir Ismagulov is one of the best fighters at lightweight. He is incredibly well-rounded, fantastic wrestling, and striking to match as well. You look at Grant Dawson, he was a guy who wasn't really looking like he was going to do a whole lot in my opinion, but he eventually broke through to the top 15. He's had some very solid wins and he's had some entertaining fights. I do think this one goes to the ground and I would give the edge to Ismagulov, but it's fighting, anything can happen. So I would side with Damir on this one, but I really do rate Dawson quite highly. And the odds have it quite close as well, with Damir being a small favourite, which I think is about right. Because I would consider him to be the better fighter, but Grant Dawson has been on fire lately. One of the best fights on the whole card is taking place on the main card. It's a lightweight bout between Ishmael Bonfim and Benoit Saint-Denis. Ishmael Bonfim, you might not recognise him by name, but I'm sure you've seen his knockout of Terence McKinney by now. It is one of the best knockouts you will ever see, and it's probably leading knockout of the year so far. A lot of people are talking about Alex Pereira and Israel Adesanya too. That was a fantastic knockout, but Ishmael Bonfim's flying knee against Terence McKinney at UFC 283 was spectacular, and it was brutal. So there's a lot of hype on both of the Bonfim brothers. Gabriel Bonfim with his 100% finish rate and his debut win at UFC 283, but Ishmael Bonfim is nothing to be snubbed at either. A serious striker. Going up against Benoit Saint-Denis, who had a lot of hype coming into the UFC, took a short notice bout with Eliezer Zaleski dos Santos, was the victim of some very poor officiating in that bout, but did manage to make it 3 full rounds with a welterweight who is very respected in his division and who outsized Saint-Denis by a considerable margin. He got back down to lightweight then in his next bout, won by first round submission. So I think there's still a lot of potential on Benoit Saint-Denis. I would side with Ishmael Bonfim still. I think Bonfim he's an animal, honestly. I think it's something to look out for, and I would recommend that you follow both of the Bonfim brothers because I think they're going to do fantastic things in the UFC. But with that being said, Benoit Saint-Denis cannot be counted out. That loss to Eliezer Zaleski dos Santos, that's his only career loss, and he still made it 3 rounds, a weight class up on short notice, and he had a terrible referee. So I would side with Ishmael Bonfim. Maybe that's me riding the hype, but I do think Bonfim is incredibly talented. Next up is the featured prelim, which is a little bit bizarre that this is the featured prelim, given the fact that it is the return of Kevin the Motown Phenom Lee, former interim lightweight title challenger. He's back in the UFC and he is taking on Rinat Fakhretdinov. And again, like I was saying, with Ishmael Bonfim or with Abusippi Magomedov, you might not know him by name, but this guy is a serious fighter. But first, let's talk about Kevin Lee. He was released from the UFC in 2021 after his loss to Daniel Rodriguez, and then he had some trouble with the Nevada Commission because of his Adderall medication. Or because of he was taking Adderall as ADHD medication, but he didn't say it to the commission, so he was ultimately let go. And he didn't have a fantastic run leading up to his UFC release. He was losing more fights than he was winning, and it just looked like he was a bit of a step behind. After that, he went to Eagle FC, fought Diego Sanchez at 165 pounds, had a little bit of trouble in that fight, but did ultimately come out on top, as most people expected him to. He has not fought since then. He hasn't fought. He was signed back to the UFC earlier this year. He's coming back at welterweight, which is a controversial decision because a lot of people feel like Lee does his best work at 155 pounds, but if he can't make the weight, he can't make the weight. So he's coming back at 170 pounds. Fakhretdinov, who he's going up against, is 2-0 in the UFC so far, 2 decision wins over Andreas Michailidis and Brian Battle, who is the Ultimate Fighter Season 29 winner. I saw his last fight with Brian Battle, and it was a mauling, to put it nicely. It was completely one-sided, and I think that he could give Lee some problems on the ground here as well. The odds makers are leading with Rinat Fakhretdinov to get the win here, but I think it's also not wise to count out Kevin Lee because he could come back incredibly motivated. At his best, Kevin Lee is a serious problem, but I probably would side with Fakhretdinov on this one as well because Kevin Lee's track record in recent years he's not the same fighter that he used to be, it seems, or that he hasn't quite lived up to the potential that we thought he could. So I'm going to side with Fakhretdinov here, but I would say by decision. His last 2 UFC fights have been decisions. I don't think this one is going to be any different. I think it's going to be a loss for Kevin Lee, unfortunately. And my last choice for this is a lightweight bout on the prelims between Guram Kutateladze and Elvis Brenner. Now, most people know Guram at this point. He is one of the very best lightweight prospects on the planet, but he's only had 2 UFC fights, and he's gone 1-1. Both split decisions, I do believe. I know that he beat Mateusz Gamrot by split decision in his UFC debut, and then I think he lost the decision to Damir Ismagulov, who's also fighting on the card. And he hasn't been able to fight a whole lot since because of visa issues and because of injuries. But anyone that has seen him fight knows just how good he is. He is almost allergic to getting taken down. His takedown defense is absolutely impeccable, and his striking is just as good. So if you're not watching this fight, I don't know what you're doing on Saturday. It's probably the fight the fight that I'm anticipating the most. Guram is absolutely incredible to watch. He's fighting Elvis Brenner, who made his UFC debut at UFC 284 in February. He won a split decision over Zubera Tukugov in a very close fight. He was originally meant to take on Jordan Levitt this weekend, and with no disrespect intended to Jordan Levitt, the jump in quality between having to fight Levitt and having to fight Guram is massive. And I don't remember being overly impressed by Brenner's first fight, and I remember a lot of people feeling like he should have lost that fight. So I'm going to have to say Guram probably finishes him in this one. Yeah, look, there's not too much about Brenner off the top of my head. I remember his last fight being very close, and I remember a lot of controversy about it. And even if he is a spectacular fighter in his own right, there's very few fighters outside of the top 15 that I see beating Guram at this point. So I'm going to say Guram within the distance. There are more fights on the card worth watching that I'll just skim over quickly. Bruno Ferreira coming off his debut knockout over Robocop, fighting Nursultan Ruziboev. That should be quite a good fight. There's Ariana Lipsky versus Melissa Gatto. Opening up the card, opening up the prelims, is Alexander Romanov versus Blago Ivanov. So a decent card all around. It's better than a lot of the fight night cards we've gotten recently, and it's on at a reasonable hour for fans who are on the UK time zone. Prelim start at 9, main card starts at 12, so decent card all around. I would say it's definitely worth a watch, but the 5 fights I pointed out, they're going to be the ones that I'm paying the most attention to. So let me know if you agree with me or if you disagree with me. What fight are you most intrigued to see? And stay tuned to Violent Money TV for more.